Letter 8. The Parroco, Parish Priest. Rome, March, 1847. My dear Eugenio, now that I have begun to open all my heart to you, I will continue to do so, as something more has happened. Certainly, I could never have imagined that matters would have arrived at this point, and had I suspected it, I would not have begun this correspondence. But now that I have begun, I will continue it to the end, and candidly relate all to you. After the last conversation at the Villa Patrici, some days passed without my seeing my 3 friends. I did not go to seek them, and, fearing that they would come to seek me, I thought of changing my lodging, in order that they might not be able to find me, and thus cut short a discussion from which, up till now, I have received no good, and fear that I shall only receive harm. While I was in this mind, I had the letter from Mr. Manson, which I here transcribe for you. Signor Abbe, since the day when we were together at the Villa Patrici, very interesting things have happened, which have thrown me into great embarrassment, and have much disturbed my convictions. You know that I am not a Roman Catholic, nor am I either one of those fanatical Protestants who find nothing but evil in the Roman Church. I do not disguise its evils and the abuses which are introduced into it, but I frankly acknowledge that there are good things in it, and if a reform in the Roman Church is desirable, its destruction would neither be just nor opportune. Well, the evening that we left you, Signor Pasquale told me that the aim of his sojourn in Rome was to lead Mr. Sweetman to become acquainted with the metropolis of Catholicism, and to make him acquainted with it under the religious point of view, that he might know well Roman Catholicism, not in theory, but as it actually is. Tomorrow, he said to me, we shall begin our practical local observations. If you will accompany us, we shall be very pleased. I accepted the invitation with pleasure, because I also desired to know thoroughly the whole ecclesiastical system of the Church of Rome, and the experience and knowledge of Signor Pasquale would admirably serve me for this purpose. Well, he added, since we have begun to discuss the supremacy of the Pope, we will direct our first observations to seeing how and by what means the Pope exercises his supremacy. The next morning we met, and went to a church, which at present I will not name. We sought the Parroco, who, already knowing Signor Pasquale, received us with much courtesy. Signor Pasquale prayed him to be kind enough to accompany us, and let us see and know the ecclesiastical congregations which form the Roman Curia. The Parroco, with a significant smile, said to us, Nescitis qui petatis. In the first place, it is a very long affair. In the second place, this being the last day of the carnival, everything is closed. Lastly, I should wish, if it be permitted, to know why you desire to see these things, and why you wish that I should serve as cicerone to you. We are foreigners, said Signor Pasquale, and desire to know the Roman Curia. We need someone to introduce us, and who can well explain everything. Therefore, we pray you to be kind enough to accompany us. The Parroco then asked who we were, and learning we were his friends, said, well, I may confide in you. You will certainly not compromise me, and these gentlemen who are your friends will certainly also not compromise me. However, today we cannot go to any place, because all the secretariats are closed. But if you will be present at the audience which I am now giving to my parishioners, you may, perhaps, learn something from it." We then descended, guided by him, to a room on the ground floor, near to the sacristy, over the door of which is written in large characters, "Parroquieta." Outside the door, there were more than 30 persons, men and women of the people, who were awaiting an audience with the Parroco. A pale man, with a repulsive physiognomy, was at the door of the room to introduce persons one by one to the audience. He exercised the office of chamberlain. That man's physiognomy made me shudder, and I asked who he might be. The Parroco, smiling, answered, "He is my sexton." Entering the room, the Parroco seated himself in his chair, and we sat by his side. The first to be admitted to the audience was the sacristan, who entered with a number of papers in his hand, which he presented to the Parroco for his signature, assuring him of their order. They were life certificates, giving power to receive pensions and subsidies from the public treasury, certificates of illness, to obtain permission to eat meat in Lent, certificates of births and deaths, and the like. The Parroco having signed these papers, the sacristan went out, and the sexton began to introduce the parishioners. I thought that all those people must be there to ask of the Parroco some religious explanation, or at least some advice as to conscience, and I promised myself I should go out edified from this function. But what was my disappointment to find that religion in no wise entered into this pastoral audience. One came to ask permission to carry prohibited arms. Another wished permission to bear hunting weapons. Another wanted a certificate to get employment. Another permission to obtain a passport for foreign countries, and so on. In the middle of the audience, a lady presented herself, dressed in silk and adorned with jewels, who, passing quickly through the midst of all, asked the Parroco for a certificate of poverty, which was necessary, she said, to oblige her husband, from whom she was separated, to pay for her support. And the Parroco immediately gave it her. We looked at one another in astonishment, and the Parroco, seeing our surprise, as soon as the lady left, said to us, "You are surprised, and perhaps also scandalized by the certificate of poverty which I gave to that lady, and you will be more surprised when you know that that lady is maintained by a very rich brother-in-law, the brother of her husband, who has only a pension of 20 scudi a month. She lives in magnificent apartments, has a servant and lady's maid, and her brother-in-law pays all, provided she does not live with her husband, nor see him more than she can help. Well, what would you have? If I refused the certificate, I should draw upon myself fierce persecution. Her brother-in-law is a religious man, and has many friends among the cardinals. She is protected by Monsignor A. But how can you, interrupted Signor Pasquale, give a false certificate? Say what you will. You have certified what is false. Gently, gently, replied the Parroco calmly. In the first place, I could answer that my certificate is merely a formality required by the law, and does no harm to anybody, for which cause, even in the case of its being false, it would not be a damnable lie, and this has become necessary in order to save me from certain persecution. In this case, the morality of our Holy Church teaches that such a lie is only a venial sin, which can be cancelled by holy water. In the second place, I will tell you that in our parochial practice, we have found the means of giving false certificates without lying, or, at least, without exposing ourselves to the peril of being called liars. See, for example, I made the certificate for that lady in this manner. I, as undersigned, attest that Signora N., as far as I am aware, is poor. By saying as far as I am aware, all is saved, because to be aware means to know certainly and with evident proofs. Now, I, not having evident proofs of her wealth, must suppose that the poverty she affirms is true. In the third place, all that this lady has, she receives from the charity of her brother-in-law, and gives some present to Monsignor A. Therefore, having none of her own, she lives on charity, so is really poor. Finally, in our secret meetings, it is decided that a certificate of poverty may be also given to the rich, because a rich man may call himself poor relatively to another richer than he. Sometimes even a rich man is poorer than a beggar, because he has greater needs which he cannot satisfy, and so suffers. But such doctrines, said Signor Pasquale, are not the doctrines of the gospel. Ah, my dear friends, replied the Parroco, the gospel is beautiful and good, but one must know how to adapt it to circumstances. I tell you honestly, I am not altogether persuaded of such doctrines, and I feel a certain repugnance to practicing them. But here in Rome, you can obtain nothing without a certificate from the Parroco. If we refuse it, we run a risk of being killed, or bastinadoed, as has happened to some of my colleagues. After this discourse, he signed to the sexton that he should introduce the other persons who waited for audience. I shall not minutely relate everything that happened during the remainder of that audience, but in general, I will say that I was greatly scandalized. Now, there was a man who exposed to the Parroco the evil conduct of his wife, and exacted that the Parroco should punish her. Then there was a woman who had recourse to him against the beatings she received from her husband. Two women of the people entered together, accusing one another reciprocally of immorality, and crying and bawling, and would have perhaps come to blows if the sexton, at a sign from the Parroco, had not turned them out. At last there entered a young girl weeping, who came to accuse her seducer, and to ask the Parroco to force this seducer to marry her. The audience, which did not last an hour, having ended, the Parroco took us to his rooms, and I asked him how often he gave this audience. How often? He answered. Twice a day, but on Sunday only once. Signor Pasquale asked him to explain to us the powers of the Parroco in Rome. They are many and delicate, he replied. It is sufficient for you to know that the Parroco in Rome is in official relation with almost all the bureau and with almost all the tribunals. Its closest relations, however, are with the vicariate. The Vicariate of Rome, or the Tribunal of the Cardinal Vicar, is at the same time a tribunal and a police bureau. It is a criminal tribunal for women of evil life and crimes against good manners. It is a police bureau as regards clericals. The Vicariate does nothing without having first heard from the Parroco. The first document of every criminal process is the denouncement or the report of the Parroco to the Vicariate. With regard to the clericals, if a young man wishes to take the ecclesiastical habit, for every order that he wishes to take, it is necessary to have the certificate of good conduct from the Parroco. Every 6 months, the priest must renew the celebrate, or permission to perform Mass, and it is necessary to have the certificate of the Parroco. Once a year, every Parroco must send to the Vicariate the list of all the priests who live in his parish, and give information with regard to all, every time that he finds any failing, either in priest or clerk. He must at once inform the Vicariate. If a priest is accused of some crime, the Vicariate does not proceed without having asked information by writing from the Parroco. In a word, the Parrochi are the right hand of the Vicariate. If this be so, said Mr. Sweetman, all the things must be fables that are related of priests, and of the impunity that is accorded to them. Unfortunately, replied the Parroco, they are not fables, and if you know what we know, you would see that what is said is only a very small portion of what really exists. But do you think that it would be wise to bring all into publicity? The Vicariate has adopted two very wise provisions to avoid such scandal. It only proceeds when the thing is already public, and the scandal cannot be avoided. When the secular arm takes action, when, in fact, it can do no less than proceed. But if the priest acts with prudence, and those who might speak are silenced, then it does not proceed, because the remedy would be worse than the evil. Suppose, for example, that a priest lives with a sister-in-law, a niece, a governess, and that the neighbors are in no wise edified by his conduct, and that such a priest, by his position, his riches, his influence, his hypocrisy, can make himself feared, and thus shut the mouth of him who could accuse him. How would you it should then proceed? The Vicariate shuts one eye, as one may say, and we all close both, so as not to reveal to the public what is hidden. The second precaution is to consider as calumnies many complaints against the priests. Suppose, for example, that a zealous priest, a good confessor, a good preacher, be accused of immorality. Do you not think that for the greater good of religion, it would be better to treat this accusation as calumny? What would the unbelieving say? What would the people say if they saw that the most zealous supporters of religion are sometimes the most immoral? Dear Signor Abbe, you cannot believe what a terrible blow those revelations gave me. Signor Pasquale gave me a knowing look, and the Parroco continued, the Vicariate acts as a tribunal of crimes against good manners. Women of bad life are all under this jurisdiction of the Vicariate, and every Parroco ought to have a book in which are registered all the women of bad life who live in his parish. At such information there issued from my mouth an "oh" of surprise. Then the Parroco drew from a drawer of his writing table a book in the form of a rubric with the alphabet in the margin, entitled The Book of the Ammoninuni Kanoki, in which were registered in alphabetical order all the bad women of his parish. When a Parroco, he continued, is tired or weary of tolerating one of those women, either he turns her out of his parish, and she is obliged to decamp immediately, or he denounces her to the criminal tribunal of the Vicariate, and, unless she has powerful protectors, she is immediately imprisoned and condemned. But do not think that in our books are registered all dishonest women. Woe to us, were it so. Who would save us from the anger of the great? In them are only those unfortunates who, in order not to die of hunger, on account of having been seduced and ruined in their innocent youth, are obliged to live bad lives. But, I answered, does the Pope know of these things? The Pope, he replied, has been a bishop and knows them better than I do. But we have a principle on which is based the whole conduct of the tribunal of the vicariate, and of two evils one must choose the least. This principle is impious, replied Mr. Sweetman, who could not contain himself. St. Paul says, Romans 3 verse 8, that the damnation of those who admit it is just. Make a distinction, replied the Parroco. St. Paul speaks of those who do evil in order that from it may come good. But we do not say that one must do evil, but that it may be tolerated. It is one thing to do evil, another to tolerate others doing it. But when that evil which we tolerate, replied my young friend, can be or ought to be prevented, and is not prevented, then one consents to it. And St. Paul says, Romans 1:22, that those who consent to or permit evil are guilty as those who do it. The Parroco did not reply to the observation of Mr. Sweetman, but he seemed to me to be somewhat disconcerted. Notwithstanding, he continued to say to us, it is not only the vicariate which occupies a Roman Parroco, but all the tribunals, all the offices, and almost all the congregations occupy him. In Rome, you can acquire nothing without the Parroco. If you wish to obtain any situation, if you wish for a favor, if you wish for an audience with the Pope, or with any high personage, you need the certificate of the Parroco. If you wish for a passport to go about your business, you cannot obtain it without our written permission. Whatever right you have to a pension, you cannot get it without our certificate. And when you have obtained it, you must every month present yourself with our certificate to renew it. A sick person is not received into the hospital without our certificate, and the relations and friends cannot visit him without our written permission. When a poor woman takes a foundling to suckle, she cannot receive from the establishment the meager monthly allowance without presenting every month a certificate to the Parroco, which attests that the wet nurse, as well as the child, enjoys perfect health. In a word, in Rome nothing can be obtained without us. But what most occupy us are the subsidies, which on the one hand give great powers, and on the other draw on us hatred, and give us a terrible amount to do. Then the official correspondence is not a small matter. The police, the Holy Office, the tribunals, the bureaus, often demand of us secret information about one or other of our parishioners, concerning his private conduct and way of thinking, and we must quickly inform ourselves, and woe to us if we say we know nothing. But how do you manage, I suggested, to know all the private conduct of your parishioners? I suppose that in Rome the parishes are very small. You are mistaken, he replied. The parishes in Rome, it is true, are not very large, but in every parish there are at least 4,000 souls, and there are some which contain as many as 10,000. How we manage to know precisely the deepest secrets is a horrible point, which I would not reveal to anyone, because I feel ashamed of it. It is a thing that presses heavily upon my conscience as a Christian and honest man, and about which I pray God to open me a way by which to escape such embarrassment. I hope, however, that you, friends of Signor Pasquale, whom I well know to be an honest and discreet man, will not compromise me, and therefore I will tell you all. The confessional and the subsidies are the two means that we put in operation to maintain the most rigorous police supervision of our parish. Not that, note well, the parishioners come to confess to us. They fear to confess to the Parroco, and the Parroco in Rome is he who confesses less than any other priest, but every Parroco has his 7 or 8 devotees spread over the parish, who are maintained by him from the subsidies which ought to go to the really poor. And these devotees religiously spy upon the whole parish. They introduce themselves into houses under various pretexts. They are friendly with the servants and talk to them about their masters. They offer kindly to lend assistance to the sick, to pass the nights with them, and in the morning are at the confessional of the Parroco to make their revelations and to receive from him commissions and instructions to make themselves masters of other secrets. Do not wonder, sirs. It is an iniquity, I know. But how am I to do otherwise? When the vicariate demands of you information for a criminal process, it has to form the basis for the acts of accusation, and must be complete and given promptly. If you say you know nothing about such a person, or about such actions, or give favorable information, when the vicariate or any other tribunal which asks you has received bad, then you are accused of not having done your proper duty. You are discredited by your superiors and are lost. The poor Parroco, in saying these things, was oppressed at heart, and one could see that the power of conscience impelled him to such revelations, which otherwise would have been imprudent. You are an honest man, said Signor Pasquale to him. Pray, and be certain that sooner or later God will liberate you from these snares of iniquity in which you are unwillingly involved. But pray tell us, how and when you exercise the essential offices of the pastor to souls, preaching, visiting the sick, the afflicted, the wandering, the poor, instruction, edification, and the like. What you call essential offices of the Parroco, and what, as I think, ought to be such, are held by us as secondary offices and of little importance. Preaching, for example, is a simple formality. There are parochi which scarcely ever preach, and leave the explanation of the gospel to their vice Parroco. There is one who is one of the best and most esteemed, who is incapable of preaching, and makes no mystery of it. He has never preached. Others explain the gospel rarely and badly, and if there were not the few devotees of whom I have spoken, there would be no listeners. As for instruction, it is given on the free Sundays, that is, on the Sundays on which there are no particular fetes. It lasts an hour, in which the little catechism of Cardinal Bellarmino is recited from memory by the few children of the people who attend. Then the Parroco gives a short explanation to the elder children of that catechism, and all is finished with the Laurentine litanies and the kissing of the Parroco's hand, which is done by all the young people. For visits to the poor, there are deputies from the Commission of Subsidies. For the sick, there is the vice Parroco and other priests paid for that purpose. The Parroco only goes to the principal families of his parish. Then Signor Pasquale, rising from his seat, brought the visit to an end, and pressing the Parroco's hand, said, I advise you, my good friend, to meditate on 1 Corinthians 4 verse 1, and apply it to your case. Let a man so account of us as of the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. And we took our leave. I confess, dear Signor Abbe, that the conversation with this Parroco, who seems a sincere man, has disconcerted me. My golden dreams of Rome begin to vanish. But what has more disgusted me is a second conversation that I should like to tell you by word of mouth, if you would give me an appointment. I need explanations. If Rome is thus, I cease to admire it. Believe me, your servant, W. Manson, M.A. After such a letter, you can understand, dear Eugenio, that I was more disconcerted than Mr. Manson, and I assure you that it has placed me in a false position. Arguments of fact destroy the finest reasonings of theologians. I hear an inward voice which says to me, "You are wrong, the Waldensian is right." I know that this voice is that of the devil, but I know that it is very powerful and does not leave me a moment's rest. I hope this temptation may pass away, because at the end, as also in the midst of the temptation, I hear the voice of God, which tells me that truth is in my religion, and not in that of the Waldensian. I know that in Rome there are abuses, but these abuses come from men, not from the religion, which is holy. They are abuses of practice, not of doctrine, which is holy and true. But what increases my agony is that I have no one to whom I can open my heart but you. And what comfort can you give me? I answered Mr. Manson, thanking him for his communication, and praying him for the moment to excuse me from an appointment. Rather, I wrote to him, if he had anything to tell me, to make use of the post. For the moment, I really do not feel capable of discussion. God will give me strength for the future. Adieu, dear Eugenio. Love, your affectionate, Enrico.